A great philosopher said that time and memory are true artists. They remould reality closer to the heart's desire. Well, Waters has certainly remoulded time to that end. But is it any good? Waters' fresh take on time pulls back from the clattering chimes of clocks in favour of a more atmospheric palette. That puts his hushed vocals at the forefront of this production. Again, like the version of Money we've already listened to, his low growl is prominent here. Waters insists, of course, this is not a replacement and that the original is obviously irreplaceable. But it does lead many to suggest that the raison d'etre for this project is more to bare his buttocks at his former bandmates than any kind of artistic integrity. The reworking of an album that's so deeply ingrained in our musical DNA does feel almost sacrilegious. Almost as if Waters takes a classic rock sacred cow and then proceeds to roger it mercilessly in front of us all. Nevertheless, I disagree with that. I personally think that this is not Waters taking a decisive dump on the legacy of this band at all. I think it's really a case of looking back on the message that was atoned in 1973 and re-examining it 50 years later. Looking back on a philosophical tract with empathy very much at the centre of it by a man in his 20s, but revisiting it now as he turns 80 and wondering whether that message really has been driven home. Therefore, I'm imbuing this with the artistic integrity that I think maybe this deserves. So as Fairport Convention sang way back in the 60s, time will show the wiser. Let's think about this rendering of this Floyd classic. As I said, gone is the clattering chimes of the clocks. The only hints are the submerged drum beat and the chimes of the piano here. All beautifully platforming Waters' kind of low growl as he interjects with another example of his poetry. Ominous throb and atmospheric keyboard beautifully just hang there as Waters recites, I think, before we get into the lyrics that we're all familiar with. We get some wonderful classical guitar, which almost serves as a bit of a light relief. It brightens the piece from this almost Ennio Morricone soundscape. And when that familiar lyric does come in, Waters' gnarled croon is interesting. I think this works better than the version of Money that we listened to personally. It's slower, as if time indeed has changed, with mortality more pertinent as a central idea of this song than it was in 1973. I love the strings on this, which provides a much needed ornamentation for the menacing pulse of this music. Instead of the guitar solo, don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore Gilmour's guitar solo. This is a reworking, reimagining, asking us to look at this in a slightly different way. We get some beautiful Hammond work instead. Beautiful Hammond work, I must say. And some nice steel pedal guitar squeals that are almost inaudible to begin with, but become more prominent, more pronounced as the track goes on. Then, of course, it segues, as it does on the album, into Breathe or Breathe Reprise. And this has a kind of a dramatic swoop of strings as Waters atones the original lyrics to the organ throb and scattered drum taps. But it ends with bird song, and at one point you can even hear a dog bark, almost as if Waters is subtly referencing his history with this band. As I said, it's an 80-year-old man looking back, slight nods, I think, to his musical legacy. And then that's all beautifully and poignantly topped off with a reminder of the idea of time passing and mortality by a funereal bell that chimes. No doubt this will segue into his version of Great Gig in the Sky. Now that would be interesting, what he does with that. Obviously, taking away those iconic Claire Torrey vocals and Richard Wright keyboard parts, I'd love to hear him kind of resurrect the mortality sequence that the band performed in 1972, leading up to the recording of Dark Side of the Moon. But perhaps a quote from Malcolm Muggeridge in there, like they originally performed it. So there you are, that's what I heard when I listened to this for the first time. Interestingly, Waters has said of this that I'm immensely proud of what we have created, a work that can sit proudly alongside the original hand in hand across half a century of time. The original Dark Side of the Moon feels in some ways like a lament of an elder being on the human condition. But Dave, Rick and Nick and I were so young when we made it, and you look around us, clearly the message hasn't stuck. That's why I started to consider what the wisdom of an 80-year-old could bring to a reimagined version. It's difficult not to argue with him here, personally, in his opinion of why he feels that this is necessary. The problem with this release, and I imagine this will bear out in the comments below, Pink Floyd now is incredibly polarised. There's the Roger camp and the Dave camp. There are people that slavishly devoted to everything Roger Waters says, and vice versa, very anti-Waters. I don't want to consider myself to be in either, just in the Pink Floyd camp. To consider the wonderful writing and conceptual brilliance that Waters brought to this band after he inherits the reins from Syd Barrett in 1968 all the way through those fabulous albums of the 1970s, but also to consider the musical orthodoxy, grace and structure that Gilmour, Wright and Nick Mason bring to this band's sound. All this beautiful fusion of concept and music is what makes this band special, and I sometimes think that both of them have kind of lost sight of that. So in that context, I welcome this release. I really do. I welcome it with an open heart and open wallet. In fact, I've pre-ordered my version already. Waters certainly hasn't lost his poetic flair, and he imbues these lyrics with a sense of almost sneering disappointment, as you would expect from Rog. You could say gone is the charm and the ornamentation of the original, as Waters now, somewhat 80, mumbles those familiar lines. But I like the quote from Waters I've just read out. It kind of tempers the bile of the original statement he made. I wrote Dark Side of the Moon, let's get rid of this we crap. Of course we were a band, there were 4 of us, we all contributed, but it's my project, I wrote it. I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching. Please do like this video, it all helps the algorithm. Click that notification bell so you get notified of any videos I upload. And share this if you know anyone who might enjoy it, please do share it. So I will leave you with my closing salvo, which, as you know by now, is hope you're well, you're staying safe, and that you keep listening.